All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. It is 5 minutes past start time and 5 minutes before our regular start time. So I like to play averages a lot of times. So, and you had off last week, so we gotta make up for that. Yeah. Comment here was restful. Yeah, no. All right, so we're going to pick back up in Deuteronomy. We are in chapter 10 now. And so, again, quick reminder, remember this book is very much back and forth of today and years past. We get a lot of things bouncing around in here. So that's good. Keeps us on our toes. First section of chapter 10 talks about the new tablets being created. This is after Moses has already come down with the Ten Commandments on the stone tablets. He casts them down, they break. So in this section, it's recapping for us that he has now made the ark, and chiseled new tablets. That's not to say he inscribed them, that's to say he cut out two new pieces of stone. Went back up on the mountain. He had already been there for 40 days and nights. That's when all of this pandemonium happened. So he goes back up on the mountain with the new tablets, clean slate tablets, nothing on them. And God inscribes them again for us. When I say us, that's pretty intentional, I think. He inscribes them for us. Moses comes back down. This time, there is no need for him to be frustrated and smash them. So they get to survive this trip, and they are placed in the ark. That's kind of where that piece of the story, okay. We finally get the Ten Commandments written down. Now they're stored in the ark. Good, period. That little piece is concluded, period, done. We hope that we don't have to see that part again. The next piece of chapter 10 talks about fearing the Lord. We've talked before about how fear sometimes is, we look at it very negatively. And oftentimes we find in the Bible times it's not necessarily a negative. It's that important. You really got to understand that fearing the Lord means you're honoring, you're respecting, you're appreciating, you're giving them their due respect. So, again, continuing on chapter 10, God asks only to fear the Lord, to walk in obedience, to love him, to serve with all your heart and soul, to observe the commands and decrees. Again, rewind slightly. This is the big treaty style of messaging. The treaty lines out, I'm doing this, you will do that. I give you this because you are going to do this with it. So he's reminding us again, fear the Lord, do these things, walk in obedience, love him, serve him with all your heart and soul, observe the commands and decrees. And I'll just toss in, remember how this group was rebellious pretty much the whole time they've been identified as a group? They've over and over and over and over done things against what he's told them to do. So he's reminding them yet again, you got to do these things. This is important. It's so important he's not forgetting about it. It's so important he's telling them over and over and continues to forgive them each time they do that. But just keep that in mind. This is to a group of people that have heard this many times, and so far every time has decided, yeah, we'll go do our own thing. We'll go make some golden calves and we'll go do whatever. So he's reminding them again. I thought it notable in verse 17 that he identifies as the great, the mighty, and the awesome. Those are some pretty good words for us today. Just consider how they may have been interpreted or understood then. We tend to use these words a little more regularly in common life. Oh, that was an awesome movie. That was an awesome performance. That was, the mighty band plays, Oz the Great and wonderful, We've used these words and make it much more normal and regular for us. And I just kind of have a feeling back then, I'm kind of guessing those words weren't used a whole lot. Like in what context? I don't know. Maybe they associated those with their kings. That would probably be appropriate, and would be even more appropriate now for God to be saying, yeah, that word you're using for these other humans, these people. Yeah, I'm it, but I'm capitalized. It's capital G great. It's capital M mighty. It's capital A awesome. I am it. I thought that was notable that some of the words we're used to using kind of normally, regularly today, he's using as descriptors way back then that I'm guessing weren't anywhere near as common as what we do today. Just something to think about. And he goes on to say salvation and grace has come to them in spite of their documented actions and behaviors. So again, he's acknowledging, I know you've messed this up every time, yet here I am again. Here I am delivering you salvation, giving you that path, and my grace is sufficient for you. That's pretty nice too. And then verse 22, I thought this was interesting. This is the first time in this book that we hear an actual number of people. So remember before we talked about the Israelite nation being the smallest of all of these nations. So he was continually telling them, you're going to go and conquer all of these different areas. And they full well knew they were the smallest in number. This is the first time that I recall being in Deuteronomy that it says originally there were 70 people. 70, just 70. Like we can say that today, just 70. They were 70 people getting ready to go do all this and the things that they had expanded and already become. And he's telling them, you will become like stars in the sky. That's pretty notable to a small group of 70 people who have been through all of these things and told what greatness they will achieve through him. It's only 70 people. I just found that interesting. Thought I'd mention it. And that kind of closes out chapter 10. That was, thankfully for us, that was a little bit of a short one, so we can try to catch up a little bit more. So we jump into chapter 11 now. He continues on about love and obey the Lord. And he reminds them that their children were not the ones who have seen and experienced God's discipline, his protection, and his awesome feats, like when they left Egypt, like when he parted the Red Sea, like how they survived in the wilderness. All of those pieces of the puzzle were all in generations past. That was kind of the point of wandering through the desert, was all of those that had rebelled against God were replaced by their offspring. Their children had now grown up. So most of them, none of them, had seen all of those things that God had done. So we can just say that and okay, but I'll remind you again, very important in this book, he talks over and over and over about teaching your children. You have got to continue teaching them and telling them. It's not enough just to have it written down somewhere or hang it on the scroll on your wrist or your forehead. You have to teach this. For how long was the question? Forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Right? You must continue. You must continue teaching. It doesn't stop. Continually teaching your children and their children and their children. The idea is that, well, I think number one, the word is alive. His word is living, and to do so, you must continue to teach it. And you must continue to reinforce it, because we know what happens when they kind of put that aside and decide to do their own things. We've seen it over and over. He's seen it over and over. So that was interesting. He reminds them to observe all of the commands so that they have the strength to take the land across the Jordan. So recall now, they're already at this point, again, he's recapping a bit, but they're already in the east side of Jordan. They haven't crossed Jordan yet, but they've already taken where the 2.5 tribes are going to establish themselves. So he's reminding them, you got to keep on now. I know we just did this whole mountain thing and you guys kind of messed up, and here I am again, and I'm helping you out. You have to stay on the right path in order for this to work. You're about to cross over the other side of the Jordan, and you will have more conquering to do. And he starts to tell them a little bit more again about what the land is like, specifically across the Jordan, but I think we're going to understand that this is pretty all-encompassing of the area they're going to now inhabit. And he reminds them the land is not like Egypt. So pause for a second. Remember, none of these people have come from Egypt. All of those people are already passed away and gone. These are the children of the children of the children. So they only know this through the stories they've heard about how Egypt was. So consider if you're wandering around in the desert and your parent, grandparent is telling you, teaching you about where your ancestors have come from, compared to being in this desert where you have everything you need, but there's, like as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, this luscious greenness and all of these things. That sounds great when you've been in a desert. So these folks have been in a desert. So anything they hear about Egypt is likely outside of their conditions is probably positive. It was established cities, it was support, it was all of these things. It was a city. They've been wandering in the desert. So that's their comparison point with the stories that they've been told, how they've been taught. So he starts to remind them the land you're going to is not like Egypt. And maybe they're worrying all of a sudden, uh-oh, we've been in a desert, but we're not going to go somewhere that's as good as Egypt. We've got the advantage of knowing, well, that's not going to be the case, that this is going to be even better than Egypt. So he describes it a little bit better. He said, this area has mountains and valleys. It drinks rain from heaven, and God cares for it. Another way of saying God provides. And that his eyes are continually on it. That should be notable to them. Again, they're coming from a desert. They're going to this place with mountains and valleys, and there's rain that falls from the sky. There's this water stuff. It comes out of, just appears in the air. Pretty cool. And it's one of those, God says, by the way, it's really good. It's really good. This is like even better than what you've heard about Egypt. It's better than all of these things any of you have experienced and any of your ancestors have told you about. It's really good. And he says the rain will come when it's needed, but here's our balance thing. The rain's going to come when it's needed, so it's not always going to be raining. If you don't like rain, okay. You're from the desert, you probably like rain. But rain's going to come when it's needed, but if you turn away from God, he will bring you no rain, and you will perish. He will recreate the desert for you again. They can relate to this just a bit. Even if there are those that haven't been in the desert, they're probably one generation removed from. So they probably understand it pretty well. So the threat of not having rain and how they will perish without it, my guess is they can relate to that pretty easily. I think the other piece here, just JJ's mental note, I think he's establishing that there's a very high or critical value in the rain and all the other things that he provides. He's choosing rain, again, I think, because they've been in a desert. So rain is a very logical thing to tell them how drastically different this will be, that they can easily relate to. But I think it also points to there is a very high value, a very critical value in the things he gives you because he knows what you need. You've been in a desert, he knows you need rain. The land he's just described and how great and green and mountainous and valley and all of that it is. There's this rain component. It's critical to them. I think that that's a way of him explaining to them, I know what you need, and I'm telling you I'm going to provide. Another way of messaging that to them. He reminds them again to remember these things, since they have a pretty good history of short memories and short willingness to actually do what they've been told. And he reminds them again, do it now and teach your children. And teach, and teach, and teach, as we talked about just a little bit ago. So much of this is about being taught by your elders, your parents, your grandparents, your ancestry is teaching you these things because they're not traveling with their phone where they can go Google something and look at what did God say 3 days ago. They've got to remember these things. And 3 years from now, if it's like it's that important, you've got to be teaching it. There is no electronic reference to go look up. They've got to do that part. So he talks about how important this is. Oh, and by the way, you should write these down and put them on your door frames and your gates. We heard about that a few weeks ago. This is their reference point. This is the server where Google is. It's on your doorframe on your gate. The information's there. You know where to go find it. You have to walk to it instead of typing to it, but it's right there. There's the server. Go look at it. And then he presents them with both a blessing and a curse. Again, a little bit of this treaty balance thing we've been talking about the whole time. You will be blessed if you obey. That seems pretty straightforward for us. We understand that concept. That's very normal, typical of the God we've learned about. If you disobey, you will be cursed. Again, recapping a bit. If you don't do these things, there will be no rain. You will be back in desert time. He's not committing to whether he's still going to provide for them or not. He probably is saying, I'm not going to provide for you because you will perish. So these things become very real, very identifiable to them again. Much like as we've seen, I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you again, and I'm going to tell you again, and I'm going to tell you again. So here he has done so. And that, my friends, closes out chapter 11. So we got two real short chapters in there that we got to kind of cover some good ground on. It's a lot of what we've already heard, a lot of the same message, a lot of the same mechanism of how they should be and what they should do and how they should do it. So now we're into chapter 12. He describes one place of worship. Right? So we know that throughout the desert times and all the other times that God went with them. They set up their tent, their tabernacle. They set these things up, and that's where God was, right? There was cloud, there was fire. We've talked about that. So he's identifying again, there's one place of worship. One place. Not wherever you want to be. One place. So he also now tells them, reminds them, that they need to completely destroy places on the high mountains, in the hills, and under every tree where the other people have worshiped their gods. So they may have had some ornate place that they had constructed for the gods they were worshiping. These other nations that they have conquered or are going to conquer. They may look kind of nice. Remember, you've been in a desert. Right? These things look very grand and great compared to a bunch of sand and no rain. And this thing called manna, which we don't know what it is, but it sustains us. So he's telling them, you've got to completely destroy these things. There's one place of worship, and that's not it. None of those are it. No matter how good they look, no matter how ornate and shiny and goldy and silvery and diamond encrusted, none of that. That's not where you go. You go to the one place. You also break down their altars. You smash their sacred stones, and you burn their Asherah poles. We've talked about the poles before. He's reminding them again. Those may look really cool. Those may look really good. Your job is to destroy them. Do not use them. They are not the one place of worship that God wants and that God will provide. So he tells them, go to the place that I choose for my dwelling. You've got to go where I tell you. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to show you. You go there, not this other stuff. And you will be blessed. That sounds nice. There's no curse attached to that part of the phrase. You'll be blessed doing this. Go do these things that may be hard for us because we get enamored with these things. Destroy them, get rid of them, smash them, burn them. Totally destroyed, gone. You'll be blessed to go do this other thing that I'm telling you. And then he gets to say to them, don't do as you're doing right now. Right? You still haven't reached your resting place, and you haven't attained your inheritance, the promised land, yet. Right? You're not there yet. There's still work to be done. So do what I'm telling you. You've got to follow. You've got to do it. You've got to keep going. You can't stop. Don't do as you've done. Don't do as you're doing right now. Maybe they're not even quite listening thoroughly right now. Don't do that. Stay on the path. Interesting time now. Okay, he tells them to bring their burnt offerings their sacrifices, their tithes, their special gifts, their choice possessions that they have vowed to the Lord, but only to the place that he's chosen. Another reminder. You're destroying these things. Okay, now it's time to don't use the stuff that's already there. I'm giving you the place. Capital T, the place. This is where you go, not this other stuff. You bring all of the offerings and all the things you've sworn and vowed to do for me. You're balancing the equation. You bring them where I'm going to tell you. I like this next part. Everyone can eat animals as much as they want anywhere else, except you got to make sure the blood's poured out on the ground. And so there's an except. But it's interesting that he's just told them about bringing sacrifices and only doing those things in the place. But he's also telling them that now, couple verses later, it's okay if you eat animals and food and the things that I provided, but do that somewhere else. When we're in the area where you're sacrificing and bringing things to me, that's what it's about. It's not about your sustenance. It's not about that. It's about you giving. In all these other places, you can go and do and live and survive. He's giving them that ability. So time for JJ notes here. This also seems to me that this is explaining or showing or demonstrating their blessing of abundance. Now it's not just we only have this and we have to eat what we're sacrificing to the Lord to survive. Now there's a little more abundance. They've got more that isn't all being sacrificed. So he's telling them it's okay that you eat of these things and do these things away from sacrifice. It's okay to do that because they're coming into the promised land and things are becoming more abundant. They're going to grow. They're going to expand. And I've got in my notes here in all caps, remember they came through a desert. Remember that the abundance is a big thing. It's more than just a weird long A word that we use, abundant. Think of the relief they're probably feeling about that. They've been in a desert, eating manna and whatever they've got. Now he's describing, you'll bring in sacrifice, but there's so much more abundance. You can eat other places now. You can eat anything you want. There'll be some qualifiers to that in just a minute. You can eat anything you want. Just do it over there. Make sure you pour the blood out on the ground. We don't want you eating, drinking, cooking blood here. Do these things. So again, remember their frame of reference, desert. Now to abundance. Think about the relief that they're likely feeling at this moment. We finally got our feet back under us. We're feeling comfortable. We can take a deep breath now. So that's probably a nice feeling. They're hearing this from him going, okay, the things I've been telling you for years and years and years, now we're at the edge of it. It's starting to happen. So here's kind of some new things. It's okay for you to do this. There's abundance for that. Next piece then is, okay, you're going to have this abundance. Now, don't forget, make sure you share this with the Levites. They're still not allowed to go and do and have and be kind of self-sustaining. That's not their role. They have their role. And the rest of the nation's role is to provide support for them. So don't forget to share this abundance with them. He reminds them again, don't worship other gods in the way that those people you're conquering have done, right? That's their gods, and their way of doing things is not God's way. I'm reminding you again, don't do that. Notably here, he also indicates, like, don't do it their way. You know, they even sacrifice their own sons and daughters. And we've seen that in the Abraham story where he was willing to, and God said, that's far enough. You've demonstrated and proven. That's good. Thanks. You don't need to do that. Now he's referencing other nations that are conquered or about to be conquered They even sacrificed their sons and daughters. And God says, that's not the way this one works. We don't do that here. Don't do those things. That's not good. Time for JJ note. We talked about inherent value in the rain that he brought them with their frame of reference of being in a desert. This seems to me an inherent value of the value of their children and the future generations. Why else would he keep telling them to keep teaching them, keep teaching them, keep teaching them? Tell them these stories, help them learn, help them know, help them understand. What does that matter if you're going to sacrifice half of them anyway? Right? So I think here, to me, he's describing a very real value in what he provides and what he's going to tell you to do. Sure, is it, again, from the other stories, do we feel like sacrificing your own children is a pretty good indicator of your allegiance to God and following and doing what he says? Yeah. And now he's saying, I don't need you to do that. You will do enough by these other things I've told you. There's too much value in your children. They don't need to be sacrificed to me. These other things I've set up for you to do are sufficient. That's a JJ note. It's got an asterisk. That means it's my thought, not what I pulled. So to close out chapter 12, he says, you just worship God just as you've been commanded. Don't add to it. Don't take away from it. We've heard those kind of terms before. Don't add to, don't take away from. He's telling him here way back at the end of Deuteronomy 12. Same message. I've given you what you need to do. I've given you the ways to do it. I've given you the abundance to make it happen. I've given you the reasons why you shouldn't do certain things you've been doing or others have been doing. Do just what I've said. I don't ask more of that from you. And I expect nothing less of that from you. Rewind, treaty, balance. The whole kind of context of this book is about that. There's a balance. This balance is do what I've said, don't take away from it, and it stays in balance. Sorry, my Zoomer friends, I gotta give you the straight on view. And that wraps up chapter 12. Some really good information, things that if we pull ourselves back to their frame of reference, their context, desert to abundance, desert to rain, group of 70 people, the 70 misfits, are going to grow and expand. And they're going to continue to do so because they're not even going to be sacrificing their own kids. The numbers are going to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. This is good, like stars in the sky. And they didn't even have telescopes, right? So they have no idea how many are out there. We kind of have a little advantage today, and who knows what 50, 100 years from now they may know that we have no concept of. It's impressive at minimum. All right, chapter 13. He's going to have to talk to him about worshiping these other gods. Now remember, he's just told them, reminder, 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 destroy all of that stuff. Don't do any of those things. That's all gone. Here in the next place we make a number, he continues on. Don't worship other gods. Don't listen to the prophets who tell you to follow other gods. So he's acknowledging there's going to be somebody that seems and acts knowledgeable about such things. Your prophets, your advisors, the folks that write the books that hit the bestseller list and everybody's go buy it and read it. You don't need to listen to those people about this. I've told you what you need. The prophets are not going to be helpful to you if they're telling you to do these things. I think it's interesting not to say, don't listen to the prophets. Don't listen to the prophets that tell you to follow other gods. Okay, so prophets have some validity. I think we're hearing that. They're going to be prophets. They're going to help you. They'll advise you. That's good. You just have to know if they're telling you to do things that I've just told you not to, okay, who are you going to pick? Who are you going to listen to? That's an easy one. You're going to listen to God on this. Further, the prophets are to be put to death if they incite rebellion. Okay. So again, remember when they're going through and conquering all these different nations and lands, remember everybody's wiped out. Clean slate time, nobody left. So the prophets have got to be their own. It's not likely that they're bringing in all these new people, because he's already said that's not the way this works. You've got to wipe them out. The prophets, to me, seem to be the prophets are now internal. They're part of the Israelite nation. So this is a big deal. If they incite rebellion, they're to be put to death. Those are pretty strong words. Because, again, from my way of thinking, they're likely Israelites. They're part of the nation. Ooh, okay, so if I'm a prophet, I'm going to make sure I'm not stirring the pot anywhere. I have to be careful because he's very clear. Put to death, just for inciting a rebellion. So maybe that's also a little bit of an indicator to us. Where did some of these misguidings come from in the past when they fabricated their golden calf and they did all these other numerous of things that got them in trouble over and over? Seems to me there may be a line to the prophets here within the Israelite nation, which means there's probably a history of this happening. It's another forewarning. Don't be in that situation. Don't listen to them if they tell you to do these things. If they incite rebellion, you've got to wipe them out just like the other people you're conquering and wiping. We can't have that. Now we get a little more complicated. The next little section, your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wife, your close friends, they're to be put to death if they suggest worshiping other gods. We hadn't gotten the picture yet. This ought to be pretty, again, flashing neon signs at us. This ought to be pretty clear to us. There is one God. You worship him and him alone. You do it in the place he says, the place he chooses, and in the manner he says and chooses. He's told us all of these things. Even these people, your close relatives, brothers, sons, daughters, wife, even your close friends. He's telling us they got to be put to death if they suggest worshiping other gods. I think God's going, I've seen this too many times. You guys aren't strong enough. So if this is even suggested, wipe it out. These people have to go. That's kind of a scary concept to me, right? I mean, in our day and age of, we think all this free thinking things we do, you don't even suggest it. You're going all kinds of wrong.
If it is your son, daughter, wife, you are the first one.
Yep.
And then everybody else joins behind you.
That's right. So comment was my next note line. That's okay. Not only is it have to be put to death for suggesting it. These are your close relatives. Not only do they have to be put to death, you are the first one to cast a stone. You have to start, and then the others will join. You throw the first stone. I don't know about you, that sounds pretty difficult. Can you think of that situation where you have to initiate the death of a close friend or very, very close relative? That doesn't sound like anything anybody of us want to do. I don't really know of anybody that would. That should be some pretty strong imagery coming to them. This is how big of a deal it is.
All the more reason to teach your children.
More reason to teach your kids. That's right. Yes. They might be throwing a stone at you, so be careful.
Forever.
So he goes on a little bit more now. We get out of the super close in. If it happens in one of the towns, right? So they're going to come into these areas of land that they're going to conquer. If you come into one of those towns, and this may be happening, you're to inquire, you're to probe, you're to investigate. So maybe there's a piece here of don't make assumptions. Now, we already know most of these areas have been worshiping other gods and doing things that he said no. And those people are going to be wiped out. So I think what he's really getting at here is like once you get established and your towns are starting to be built in the promised land that I'm giving you and you're going to go into, if it starts happening there, well, you got to investigate. Go see what's really happening. So if it's something going on in town, and if you prove that it's true, whatever this is that's happening, you kill the whole town. Right? So now we're going outside the kind of the family unit and close friend, family unit neighbor, maybe we might say it that way. Next step now is you're looking at a whole town. And if a whole town has gone wrong, I'll put that in quotes just because that's a word I'm choosing. If they've gotten away from what God's telling them and you prove it, you've checked, you've investigated, you've probed, you've made extra sure they're doing it wrong, you kill the whole town. And that's people and livestock. But even animals have got to go. Do we think it's the animals doing something? Probably not. This is, again, describing how serious this is. It's so important. You must wipe it all out. And to me, this is telling me this is why you don't want to be in this situation. That's how bad it will get. Okay, so it's kill the people, kill all the livestock too. You don't even get to save them. That's how big a deal this is. Maybe that should be kind of my personal note theme for chapter 13 is this is a big deal, right? Even more after that, then you'll burn all the plunder that you get there. So everything, all the other things, you've killed everything that's alive. All the other stuff, you're going to burn it as a burnt offering, but it's gone, right? You don't keep any of that either. That's already happened. Remember, that's already happening with the conquering phase. So this isn't taking over the conquering land part. This is after they've been there. This is the Israelites. Anything they've amassed and developed and produced and fabricated and crafted and all the other words we use for that, all of that gone. And then here's the last one. End of chapter 13. Here's the last one. You will never rebuild that town. Never. So talk about not just wiping people out, off, gone, livestock gone, all of the stuff, all the plunder gone, the town itself gone. We might equate that to saying, like, remove from history. I will take you out of the history book. There will be no town. And once you get a couple of generations on after the teaching, who's even going to remember this town other than, there was this town before. You don't know about it and you can't travel to it and you can't go see it because it doesn't exist now. That's how big a deal this is. Wiped. The entire town gone, not rebuilt, not rehabilitated, not repopulated, not anything. The town is gone, never to be rebuilt. Again, another very strong message. This is important. This, summing chapter 13, is a big deal. And there's the end of chapter 13. I got 5 minutes. We're gonna go quick. Chapter 14 then. He talks about clean and unclean food. There's some interesting things in here. So first off is to not cut or shave the front of the heads for the dead, right? So what I'm going to assume then is that during that time, that's probably some of the mourning process was So they talk about renting their clothes and all of these things. Well, apparently shaving the front of your head may have been a part of that. I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. It deserves a little further study if you're really interested in what shaving the front of the head was really indicative of. Let's just suffice it to say that for right now, God says you don't need to do that. He's likely to give us another way to help us know or understand or deal with what's going on. He reminds them not to eat detestable things. Well, what might that be? Oh no, there's some things we've been told. You shouldn't eat this, you shouldn't eat that, you shall not eat that. So he's reminding, don't eat detestable things. So maybe it's a little easier at this point. He says, here are the things you can eat: ox, sheep, goat, deer, gazelle, roe deer, wild goat, ibex, antelope, mountain sheep. These are specifically listed in the scripture. Specifically listed. I didn't make those up. Those are in there, at least in an NIV version. Maybe they're translated slightly differently in another. That's on the list of things you can eat. Specifically then, also any animal with a divided hoof and chews the cud, right? We've heard those kinds of things. So cattle chew the cud. But you also got to have divided hoof, right? So two pieces. Cows don't usually have divided hoofs, I think, right? It's one. So again, rules that they understand because they're immersed in a farm type culture. They're dealing with their livestock day in, day out. This is what they do. So they're going to understand these pieces of rule very well. He adds in a little bit about what you shouldn't eat, what you shall not eat. You may not eat camel, rabbit, hyrax, I don't know what that is, or pig. Okay. Those four, again, specifically listed in scripture, not things I've made up and just try to look at somebody's research and say, well, would that work? Would that work? It's specific in scripture. These things you may not eat. So here's another little catch-all coming next. You may eat anything with fins and scales. So generally fish is what we think of. Maybe some reptiles. I don't know. Maybe there's a good snake stew going on. Fins and scales. Eat anything. And any clean bird. So now you got to wonder, okay, what's a clean bird? Well, he's nice enough to tell us because, we're the human people. So you may not eat, and I'm not going to read this list to you, but again, a list very specific in scripture, each of them listed. There's 21, if I counted correctly. 21 different bird type birds, 21 different birds you may not eat. What's interesting to me, and just kind of skimming the list, is how many of the same type of bird are listed. There's multiple owls, there's multiple hawk or those types of birds that are the aggressors. It's just very interesting to me. I don't know what a hoopoe is. I'm gonna have to do some research on that in my own time. And then the 22nd item, I didn't count in the number. 22nd item, any flying insect. Right. So as much as they might like to go after those locusts that they heard all those bad stories about, we're gonna pay them back. Let's go have a locust stew. No flying insects. You may not eat of those. Okay. Next thing. This one's interesting to me too. Very interesting. You may not eat anything that's already dead. But you can give it or sell it to a foreigner to eat. Okay. So if it's already dead, you may not. Like we get that. Like that applies to us today too. If it's already dead, roadkill, yes. That's exactly where my mind went. You don't eat that. But here's the interesting thing is you can give it or even sell it to a foreigner for them to eat. So, asterisk, JJ note. To me, this seems to dispel a little bit of the things we've tried to put into God's word in this aspect, where we say, well, you don't eat things that are already dead because it's unsafe for us and it will make us sick and it will hurt us. that doesn't follow when you're allowed to give it or sell it to someone else to eat. So the things that we have tend to put in here to say, well, here's the reason God said that. It's just logical. It doesn't have anything to do with what God said. It's because it's just logical. It's biology. Come on. It's, to me, this dispels a little bit of the things we've since put in there in our minds to say, well, God said it, but it's really just because of this other thing that we're smart enough to have figured out. To me, this one right here tells me something other than that. If it's okay for somebody else to eat it, then I don't really equate the health hazard to it. Unless he's trying to tell us there's no value in other people's lives, and I don't think that's the case. Highly unlikely. Okay? So you can't eat anything that's already dead, but others can. So there's a reason for this. What that deep reason is, I don't know. I don't have that answer. He then moves into tithes. We're almost out of time. We are out of time. He moves into tithes. They're to give 1/10 of their field production of grain, wine, oil, the firstborn of their herds and the flocks. But it's to be eaten at God's dwelling place in his presence. So we're kind of rewinding a little bit back to the, you will give sacrifices I tell you about in the place I tell you. And this is what it's for. Not for your sustenance. These things are reserved for the sacrifice time. You're still going to get to eat it most likely. But it's done a certain way, in a certain place, at the right time. Again, shouldn't be too foreign of a concept for us today or for them. There have been rules established. They understand that part. He gives them a little bit of the out, again, for us human folks that like to try to outthink God. Well, it's too far. I can't make the trip. The livestock's not going to survive. The grain's going to spoil. The wine will spill. Whatever our excuses are, these human things we come up with, is too far away. He says, well, you know what? If it's too far away, I'm going to tell you right now. You can exchange that for silver, and you'll bring the silver. Okay, now you're not going to eat the silver. I think they probably understand that too. But here he's just removing one of those little goofy human excuses we like to put on things. Go, well, I couldn't do it, God, because it's too far away. Sorry. I stayed home and ate it instead. That'll have to be good enough for you. No, he's telling us you can exchange it, barter it, sell it for the silver, and you're going to bring it. And when you arrive with the silver, then you can buy cattle, sheep, wine, fermented drink, and anything you want. So you can use it for that, but you're going to do it in the right place. You're going to bring it. You're not going to sell it back home and have the silver to go fashion your bed or decorate your doorpost. No, you're going to still come to the right place, and you're still going to do the right things with it, because you're going to use the silver to buy replacement of things you couldn't travel, things that were too far away for us whiny humans. Then you're going to eat it in his presence, and you're going to rejoice. Right? You're going to eat it and you're going to like it. We probably all heard that at some point in our life. Most likely, if we were about 2 feet tall, we probably heard those same kind of words. You're going to do these things and you're going to rejoice. It's even through all of that, what we might call hassle. It's still going to be that great. You will still be rejoicing in what you're doing. Oh, here's a little reminder now. Don't neglect the Levites. Remember, they're there doing the work, and they're not allowed to do these things on their own. That's, again, not their role. Part of your role, part of this bargain is you're going to bring them along with you. You're going to take care of the Levites. He reminds them again. Now, if they're just kind of following the principles of godness, then they're going to be sharing with them anyway, right? But he's very specific. Multiple times in these couple of chapters we've hit today. Don't forget about the Levites. This is important. And at the end of every 3 years, here's a little bit of the rule and planning for them. So the planner humans that like to figure all these things out and make their schedule and check with a babysitter and all that. At the end of every 3 years, you store your tithes in towns for the Levites. Every 3 years, there's replenishment then, right? You make sure every 3 years you've stored up for the Levites and for the foreigners and for the fatherless and for the widows. Okay, so now we're seeing a little stretch outside of just worrying about the Levites. There's a reminder that, hey, there's other people that sometimes run into tough times, that have situations that arise that they need some help. Your job is to have already saved something for that. And every 3 years, you're storing that. You're replenishing. It should continue. That's pretty interesting things. That brings us to the end of chapter 14 and way late on ending class today. So thank you very much. We've got a couple minutes. Hello, my Zoom friends. We'll see you all very soon. Thank you.